This is not the Third Reich of the great victories in France and the Soviet Union. It is a Germany bracing itself against the upcoming push from the east. Over 1 million troops assembled on the English Channel are waiting to launch their assault on the northern French coast. Deprived of resources and manpower, the Third Reich knew that repealing the upcoming landings on the west would have been crucial to then redeploy their units against the massive Soviet offensive in the summer. A debate arose among the Nazi high command on how to defend northern France. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, as Commander-in-Chief West, favored concentrating their panzer units into an operational reserve away from the coast, to be launched in a decisive counterstrike once the Allies established a beachhead. On the other side, Erwin Rommel, commander of Western defenses and Army Group B, preferred scattering armored formations near the coast to face the landings head-on. Rommel drew from his experience in North Africa. He knew that Allied air power would constantly harass roads leading to the coast, thus limiting any armor concentration. 9 Panzer and a single Panzer Grenadier division represented the real mobile striking force in the order of battle, but authority over their deployment and use had become a major bone of contention. It fell to Hitler to make the critical decision, and true to form, he opted for a compromise solution, placing some tanks near the coast and others concentrated near Paris. In the unfolding drama, Rommel was entrusted with operational control of only 3 panzer divisions. The 21st Panzer, the lone division within striking distance of the Normandy coast, stood ready for action. However, the other 2, the 2nd and the 116th Panzer Divisions, were frustratingly held back north of the Seine, far from the imminent conflict. 3 additional divisions, the 2nd SS, 9th and 11th, were stationed with Army Group G in the south of France, far from the critical front line. The remaining formidable forces, the 1st SS, 12th SS, 17th SS, Panzer Grenadier and Panzer Lehr divisions, were held with Panzer Group West as the reserve that Rundstedt continuously argued for. Yet these elite divisions were shackled by bureaucracy, their movements strictly controlled by the omnipresent grip of the Führer. Long before any invasion of the European continent could be planned, efforts to weaken the German Air Force had already begun. This was part of Operation Point Blank, known as the Combined Bomber Offensive, which involved extensive bombing raids on key industrial sites within Germany. As the invasion approached, during Big Week, February 1944, the Americans launched raids to provoke a significant German Air Force response, and the Mustangs proved highly effective against Luftwaffe fighters, causing unsustainable losses. By April 1944, Operation Point Blank had concluded, and the Allies had achieved air superiority over Europe. From mid-March until the eve of the invasion, RAF fighter bombers targeted radar installations and forward air bases along the French and Belgian coasts. On June 6th, the long-awaited invasion of France began. No words could explain the barrage of fire that rained down upon Axis lines. German positions were pounded by preparatory fire without restraint. The skies were free for Allied aviation. The Luftwaffe could not muster enough resources to contest the air at the tactical level. The beachheads were easily established, and now the Allies looked to solidify their positions into a coherent front. Wehrmacht infantry formations and the local presence of single tank formations managed to form a defensive perimeter around Normandy. Von Rundstedt secured Hitler's permission to release formations from the armored reserve, precipitating a solid tank thrust into the enemy. It took multiple days for all the panzer formations to arrive in Normandy, but it was finally time to launch the decisive punch. Despite their combat experience and ability to fight in improvised battle groups, Nazi armored formations in Normandy were devastated by relentless air power. Allied bombing continually disrupted supply lines and reinforcements while also inflicting heavy casualties. Operations like Epsom and Charnwood further weakened Axis defenses, and by the time of Operation Cobra, the Third Reich could no longer mount effective counterattacks. As an example of the lethality of enemy airstrikes, bombing attacks completely wiped out the Panzerlehr division during Operation Cobra. Even as the Germans were being slowly pushed back and sustaining heavy losses, their desire for a concentrated armor push didn't fade away. In the early hours of August 7th, Operation Lüttich was launched with 5 panzer divisions, mustering a mere 220 tanks and 70 assault guns. Over 3 grueling days, the German advance stalled at just 5 miles. American artillery, anti-tank gun screens and relentless fighter bombers decimated the Reich forces, destroying at least 100 tanks and crippling their assault. The ambitious counteroffensive was brutally halted, showcasing the overwhelming might of Allied firepower. Soon, Nazi lines were depleted from the multiple snatches from Montgomery. Their lines couldn't maintain cohesion. After 2 long months, the Allies finally broke from their beachhead deep into French territory. Now, knowing how important air power was in eroding the armored counteroffensive, could Rommel's plan of scattering armor vehicles along the coast have been the most effective way to repulse the landings? We can see glimpses of his initiative during the early phases of the battle. The 21st Panzer Division was near the beach and thus immediately available for a counterattack. It was not until mid-afternoon on D-Day that the division finally advanced against the British north of Caen. The German assault was beaten back by British tanks and artillery. Some panzers reached the coast, but then had to withdraw. They lost 70 out of 124 tanks. More than air power, it was naval artillery that seriously hammered any Axis concentration near the beach. Thus, armored cars were still exposed to long-range fire from both the Allied Navy and Air Force. Spacing the panzers along the coast also brought a strategic setback. Even though 1,000 tanks were available before D-Day, it was not a sufficient force to secure every sector of the French Atlantic area. Under Rommel's plan, the hinge centered around stopping the Allies on the beach. A severe flaw was that given the case of a breakthrough, the Germans wouldn't not have a mobile reserve to slow down an armor push and thus avoid getting surrounded in a pocket. While we still debate whether Rommel's or Rundstedt's strategy was superior, air power was a factor that decisively tilted the balance. The German tank push to Normandy didn't translate into significant losses during the race to the sea. Supply convoys and unarmored formations were the ones decisively hit from the sky. Lack of necessary supplies was one of the factors that stalled not only the panzer thrust, but even maintaining a defensive perimeter. Once the mighty Panzerlehr or Hitlerjugend divisions arrived on the battlefield, they couldn't concentrate in the open field because they were easy prey to P-47s and heavy bombers, limiting their efficiency. As the dust settled over the charred remnants of once formidable armored divisions, it became starkly clear the skies belonged to the Allies, and with that dominance, the fate of the Nazi war machine was irrevocably sealed. The devastating impact of Allied air power not only decimated German tanks and supply lines, but also crushed the very spirit of their defense. After August 1994, the Allies swept through a weakened enemy until reaching the very shores of the River Rhine.